this week on a special episode of Becoming Godly Men, we're going to explore a Sunday school lesson that I prepared, written, and that presented to my Sunday school class at my local church. This is on a very important topic that we all fight with, we all struggle with, and I think we all have to be aware of, and that is dealing with doubt. Doubt is something that we are told that we should not have, that we are wrong or weak if we have it, but in reality, everyone deals with doubt at some point in their life and their spiritual walk with God. In this lesson, I talk about how some of the old individuals from the Old Testament and New Testament both deal with doubt, how some of the disciples themselves deal with doubt, and what the ramifications are of dealing with doubt. So I hope this is something beneficial for you. I hope you find some value out of it. And without anything further, let's dive into the lesson. All right, I'm going to be in a couple of different places. If you want to turn to 1 Kings chapter 19, what I want to talk to you about is, I think, something we've all dealt with. It's something I think we've all had experience with, and that's dealing with doubt, right? And doubt has this, it's a very bad word, right? It's a very scary word, and it's something that you think about the topic of it, it's something that has a very negative connotation to it. Something that's very negative when we think about our faith is doubt. But if you really think about it, have you ever questioned something you believed, especially about God? Right? Any time in your life, have you ever really questioned something you believed? Well, if you have, which I think most of us probably have, that's where doubt creeps in. Yeah. That is doubt, right? So just kind of having that questioning or that uncertainty about something that you believe. And doubt is not uncommon. It's a very common thing, I believe, that something we all face and we all have to deal with. What we do with doubt is what matters, right? What we do with doubt will either weaken or strengthen our faith. And that's the important part, is not just having that doubt, but addressing it in a positive way and then adjusting to it and moving on from being doubtful or living in that temporary time of doubt. When doubt becomes a permanent thing, that's when it's a bigger deal. But if it's a temporary thing, it can be healthy. And that can actually strengthen our faith and strengthen our resolve and get us closer to God. But it just depends on how we address it. James 1:6 says, "But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering, for he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed." We may get into doubt, but God doesn't want us to stay there. That's not what we should reside in. We shouldn't stay in that moment of doubt. He really calls us to grow beyond it. Getting into it, that's fine. We're humans. We're going to have doubt. But then transitioning out of it and moving out of it. So if you think about what is doubt, right? What actually is doubting, or what does that actually constitute? It's uncertainty about truth, right? And we may know things to be true, and we may know the Bible to be true, but we may be uncertain at times. And it's not all the time. There's a difference between temporary and permanency, but when we think about truth, we may just be uncertain of what's truth in our own circumstance, in our situation, or in our life. And it's also hesitation when we trust God, right? Hesitation in trusting Him, because we have to trust Him in certain situations. There's things that we're going to encounter, that we're going to face, that we have to put full trust in Him because we can't fix it. Only He can fix it, or only He can change it. And it's also questioning God's promises, His timing, or His presence, right? When we look at situations we're in, we may want something to happen right now. We may be looking to God to fix something or answer our prayer right away. It's not always the case. Right? When we pray for something, there's three answers: yes, no, or not right now. It's not a maybe. It's not something like that. It's either He's a yes, or He's a no, or He's later on. And we may get into a spit of doubt with that, because it's hard to wait. And we want it right now, right? Anybody kind of want their prayer answered like tomorrow? No, we want it right now. And that's a hard thing to deal with. But doubt is not the same as unbelief. Doubt is struggle, but unbelief is refusal. Right? Doubt is just we struggle with things. And you can call it whatever, but doubt has that word of it's negative. But if you struggle with your faith, that's doubt. If you struggle with, is God going to answer this? That can be doubt. Right? It doesn't always promise that He's going to answer everything we want. I mean, you can pray for the lottery. It doesn't mean you're going to get it. But if you pray for healing, you pray for different things, in those moments, we may doubt, is He really going to come through? Is He going to do that? And I don't think that's necessarily negative, right? It always seems that way, but you can have faith and still wrestle with doubt. You can be very close to God and still wrestle with doubt. And there's a lot of different causes of doubt, a lot of different reasons and times we can be doubtful, difficult circumstances, delayed answers from God, right? We start getting those thoughts of doubt creep in, fear and anxiety, right? When you get fearful and something is really weighing on you and something that you're facing that you're not sure how you're going to get through, or that's just a scary circumstance, or a lack of spiritual grounding. And that's really what our lesson's going to be about. I got different stories and things, but if we look at 1 Kings 19, and just starting out with 1 through 4, it says, "And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and with all how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers." So when you think about that piece, Elijah just had a major victory in chapter 18, right? So he had this major victory, and it's where he goes from this major victory, and then almost immediately, it seems, he goes into this moment of fear or discouragement right after. So he goes from being way up on the mountain to way down the valley real quick. And that's the way it seems. If we really think about our own lives and our situations or circumstances we've been in, anybody ever faced that where you feel like you're on top and then something happens and it just crushes you? That's pretty much where Elijah's at. And that's something that, I think regardless of how close you are to God or what you deal with, that's something that we all will deal with in time, right? If you don't, maybe you're just not looking at the right moments. You're not really as close to God as you may think. It's just depending on how you're looking at your situation. But even strong believers have moments of doubt and discouragement, right? People often look at the pastor. He never has any kind of doubt or never has any kind of discouraging moments, or everything's great for him. Yeah, okay. Keep believing that, right? I'm not the pastor of this church, but being a preacher, that's very discouraging sometimes when you try and work on messages, you get things together. When you're a deacon, that's hard stuff to do, right? When you're trying to do all these different things, all these different pieces, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you've ever sang a song, spoken out, nothing. You can be a member of the church. You still have moments of doubt and discouragement, regardless of how close or how far you may feel from God sometimes. Right? We all have that. Spiritual highs can be followed by a lot of emotional lows. Right? You can really go from feeling like you were just so high, you're doing so good, God's blessing you in so many ways, and then one thing can happen and you just drop. And I've seen that in my own life before, to where I've had messages and I'm like, this is great, this is awesome, and then I give it, and then I go and everybody's, I have different people tell me that was a great message or that helped them or whatever, and that really hit them, and then something later in that day, and it just deflates your entire little balloon, and you're just down. You feel like dirt. You feel like trash. And I think it happens to everybody. But God responds in these situations with care and not condemnation, right? And that's the beautiful thing. We're going to face those trials. We're going to face those different instances, and we're going to go through those times. But we have to look to God, because He doesn't condemn us when we have those feelings or we have that doubt or we have that uncertainty. That is a great thing that we can be reminded of, because if He did, I think we'd all be in a lot of trouble. Now, if we fast forward a little bit and just look in the same chapter, verses 11 and 12, it says, "And he said, Go forth, stand upon the mount before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and brake into pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire." It says, "And after the fire, a still small voice." So I think God was trying to show Elijah, right? You may look at your circumstance of this great wind breaks up this mountain. You may look at this huge earthquake that just rattles the entire ground underneath you. You can look and you can see this fire that's coming out. But that's what you see and what you're perceiving. And that seems scary and seems uncertain. It seems huge. God wasn't in that. But that still small voice was talking to him and told him what he needed to hear. That's what we should be focusing on. We get into these moments, just like Elijah did, of this low, this down and discouraging time and this whatever we're facing. When we get into that, we look at that situation. We're going to look at our circumstance. We're going to look at what's happening in front of us, what we can tangibly touch or physically see with our eyes. But what we need to focus on is that still small voice. They say God doesn't talk to people anymore. He does, just not what we think of, not that audible. You're not just going to sit and ride down the road and start asking God something. He may not come out with an audible voice. Can he? Sure. He has in the past, right? But it doesn't always happen that way. But that still small voice, that thing that you can feel. And when you're connected into God, you'll know what I'm talking about. When you're tuned into God and you're talking to him and you're constantly trying to build that relationship with him, you can hear that voice and you can understand it. But it's often the loudest, right, in the room that gets a lot of attention. You look at these protests, these marches, these rallies. What is somebody up there doing? They're up there yelling and screaming and hollering, and that's what people follow. I think that's what weak people follow, is when somebody has to scream and holler and make all these wild accusations and all these crazy comments and things. That's what people follow, but that's often the loudest person in the room because they're looking at the physical and the material and right in front of them. They're not looking at what God has for them, and they're not trying to follow what he's got. And I think that's important. And it's really something that we should really focus on, is focusing on what God has for us. If you look back a little bit, I'm not going to read through them, but if you look through verse 5 and 8, he goes and Elijah, after this discouragement, he lays under this juniper tree and he's laying there and he just wants to die, right? And he actually asks God, he just says, take me out, just take my life. I'm worthless, right? But the angel of the Lord shows up, gives him some food and some drink. Elijah takes a nap. He wakes him up later. The same angel wakes him up, gives him some food and something to drink, and he takes a nap. So if you're ever in a doubtful moment, need some kind of discouraging time, remember to have a snack, take a nap, everything will be fine. That's the important part. The Bible tells us all the time, Jesus took naps. So if you ever feel like you're in that moment, just have a snack, take a nap, you'll be all right. But if you think about why doubt happens, like if we think about Elijah's situation and his circumstance, think about why doubt happens. It's focusing on circumstances instead of God. And that's hard to focus on God sometimes when the circumstance is right in front of you and you want that to happen so much, right? And there's certain things that we see. But we don't know what God knows. And we don't have the same plans. He has plans for our life, and he has plans for what's going to happen, whether we agree with it or we like it or not. Sometimes we're not going to like it. You're not going to like everything that happens in life. And you're not going to agree with everything that happens in life. But God has plans for it. But we've got to look at and follow through faith on what's going on and not just a circumstance or the situation in the moment, right? Situations change, things happen, and things are going to happen that's going to be unpleasant, but that's for a short time, right? It's for a season. But we have to focus on that's for a season. It will pass and it's going to go away. 2 Corinthians 5 and 7 says, for we walk by faith, not by sight. We should be walking by faith and following God in faith, not just by sight of what we see. And it also could be a lack of spiritual foundation. Right? When we look at our spiritual foundation and look at our lives, right? When we have a lack of spiritual foundation, doubt and uncertainty creeps in because we don't have something to really be founded on. We don't have something to actually base our belief on. But we have to have that strong foundation so that we can stand when those times come, because those times will come. There's going to be times with, like I said earlier, doesn't matter how close you are to God, you're going to have those situations and have those different times that bad things are going to happen. Unpleasant things are going to hit your life. You're going to go through trials. Everybody, a lot of people claim that being a Christian means that everything is just puppy dogs, rainbows, and unicorns, and it's not. Not even close. It's actually very tough, very hard, and very difficult at times. But it's very rewarding, and it's not something that I wouldn't rather have anything else. I would rather be following God than following back in the life that I used to have. It's so much more rewarding, but it's also so much more comforting. Romans 10:17 says, so then faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So we have that. To have that spiritual foundation, we have to be in the Word. We have to be here in church so we can hear the Word being taught, hear it being preached, hear it being sung about. Right? We have to be rooted into truth. You don't have to be in church to be a Christian, but you have to be somewhere to get that feeding, get that nourishment, get that encouragement, and get into the Word and get in there in a different way. We also have doubt because fear and anxiety, just like what Elijah was going through. Right? Why did he get fearful? Because they said they were going to kill him. It ends up saying in here that he was the only prophet left. He was the only one that wasn't killed yet. They were killing them all off. Well, he was afraid because they told him, I'm going to kill you. Like, that's what Jezebel said. I'm going to kill you by tomorrow. And he thought, well, I'm going to end up like all the rest of them. This sucks. That would suck a little bit. That would stink. That would be kind of crappy. But he did not look at what God was going to do and protect him and what God just did. He got his eyes off of what happened in 18 and got his eyes on, well, they're going to kill me. I'm doomed now. Instead of looking at what God's going to do, he looked at that circumstance and that situation. Fear, it feeds doubt, but faith drives it out. So when you have fear, that's going to feed that doubt. It's going to make you more doubtful. The more you focus on fear, anxiety, and that uncertainty, that's going to feed that doubt. But if you have faith and you follow that faith in God, it's going to end up driving it out. And then the last point is isolation. Doubt grows when we're disconnected from God and from others, right? You don't have to be in church to be a Christian, but you have to be part of the church, not just a physical building, but the church. When you're not connected to the church and you're not with others to get encouragement, get uplifted, get taught, get brought up, whatever, it's going to end up disconnecting you from God and from other people because you're going to get stuck on the circumstance. Whatever you follow, right? If you follow in God, that's great, but you have to get some kind of feeding and encouragement. And you can get that from just reading the word, but you're not going to get the same thing, right? So we have to be connected in. In John chapter 20, kind of all the way over the other side of the Bible, and it's not a new story at all, right? It's a story that we all know, but John chapter 20, we're going to be in verse 24 through 29, and we're talking about some of the disciples, right? And we're looking at one particular of Thomas. 24 to 29 says, but Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. And the other disciples therefore said unto him, we have seen the Lord. But he said unto them, except I shall see in his hands and the print of the nails, and put a finger in the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. And after 8 days again, his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the door being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, peace be unto you. Then saith he to Thomas, reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing. And Thomas answered, said unto him, my Lord and my God. Jesus said unto him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed. Now we know the story of Thomas, right? We know that very well. We've all heard that many, many times. And Thomas gets that rap of being the doubter, right? It's doubting Thomas. When you think about Thomas, right? Thomas doubted even after hearing the truth from the other disciples, right? They told him about it. Told him, we've seen Jesus. He's here. And he was like, no, he's not. He didn't believe it. He just kind of dismissed it and just let it go, right? Because he didn't physically see it. That faith was not really there. If you really look at how Jesus responded, he didn't reject him. He didn't condemn him. He didn't chastise him. He didn't say anything negative to him. He just said, hey, Thomas, come here and check it out. Right? You wanted to see? Here it is. Come check me out. See me. And now because you've seen me, you believe, but bless more the ones that have not seen. So it's just, he's showing him that if he had that faith to really believe, it would have been so much more than if he just seen me. But if you look at this particular situation, Thomas is the doubting Thomas, right? He's the doubter. All the disciples doubted. Everybody doubted. What were the women going to the tomb for? They were going to put on spices because they thought he was dead. They didn't believe he rose again. That was doubting. They were uncertain. They didn't have a clue. They thought, well, he's dead. Let's go do what we're supposed to do with the body. Right? So that's what they were going to go do. Where was Peter and John? The two that ended up getting to the tomb. Where were they at? They're sitting back at the house, hanging out. They're just chilling out. Girls come up and tell them, Jesus ain't there. Then they go. And then they still don't believe it until they go in there and they look inside. And then they realize it. So doubt is one of those things that even the disciples, they walked with Jesus every single day. They saw some awesome stuff, right? And we often think, I've heard people even say it, if I was there around Jesus' time, I would have believed. Not necessarily, maybe, but how much? How much would you actually have followed and been there with him and not doubted? We still would have doubted. We're still human, right? Yeah. I've seen miracles that God's done. You just look at my wife, right? Everybody knows about April's story. You look at April. It's a miracle. That's how I met her. Ironically, it's kind of funny. It's a very long, drawn-out story. But when you look at things like that, we all still can doubt. Even seeing a miracle like that. Seeing these different things physically happen, that it's just like, how did that happen? Doctors have no idea. But we still doubt. We still forget. We still look at circumstance. We still look with our physical, temporal eyes, and we look at this material, temporal world. We look at things outside of or inside of our own mind, what we can comprehend. But we can't fully comprehend God because he is so much more powerful than us. We are so finite. We're so ingrained in our own self and our own lives. But doubt often demands proof. Like when we doubt, it's because we're not seeing the proof, or we forget the proof that we had seen, or we forget the things that we'd experienced. Faith is trust without seeing. It's not blind trust, though. I don't believe anything just because somebody tells me to. I want to have something, right? I'm very analytical. It's just the way my brain works. I like to see things. I like facts. I like real pieces, right? I don't just believe something because somebody says, hey, this is the way it is. Well, why? Right? I like to ask those kind of questions. But when you really dive into this word and you dive into the Bible, it tells you why. And it gives you that proof. And it gives you that reiteration of why you should be believing this. So it's not just blind faith. It's not just believing something because, I'm supposed to. I didn't grow up in a church. I didn't grow up in a Christian home, right? So I didn't grow up at that foundation. I'm not saying that if you did, you don't have it. I didn't have that, so I had to learn it differently, and I had to adapt, and I had to understand what was really going on. And I came to it much later because I didn't grow up in that. If you look at how we doubt, and Thomas doubted, and all these disciples doubted, Jesus didn't condemn any of them. Anyone that ever doubted in the time that he was here on this earth, he never put them down. He was always patient, and he called them to grow. He wanted them to understand, wanted them to see the truth and to grow with it, and to really enhance with it. Now, the last one I want to bring out is in Matthew chapter 14. It's another story that we've all heard, and it's again about another disciple. It's different than the Thomas situation because Thomas always has that doubting Thomas marker on him. This one's about Peter, who is the rock, right? We often think Peter, and we're thinking you can't get stronger than that or a more connected disciple. It's still, we're going to see he still had his own struggles. So Matthew 14:28 through 31 says, and Peter answered him and said, Lord, if that be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, come. When Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and called him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? Now think about that, right? There's two different flip sides you can see on this story that always amaze me. Peter looks and sees Jesus, and they see Jesus walking on water, and they had an argument, is it a spirit, is it him, whatever. He says, if it's you, let me come out to you, which is a very bold statement, but that's pretty cool, to have that much faith to ask that. And he said, yeah, come on. So Peter steps on out the boat. We all been on boats before. You step out of the boat on the water, what's going to happen? You're going to go into the water. You're going to go down. Peter got out and walked on the water with Jesus. That's amazing, right? That's pretty cool. But as soon as he got out on that water, he saw some wind, he saw some waves, he saw what's going on, that fear creeped in. Right? He got his eyes on his circumstance. He got his eyes off of Jesus, and he got his eyes on what he was looking at. And then what happened? Like a rock, right down in the water. Right? And that's what we often do. How many of us would have the faith to go, Jesus, if that's you, let me come out and walk in that water with you. Being in the water, they're fishermen. They know what water is. They know how it works. Right? It's not a big mystery. How many of us would actually have the faith and the courage to say, Jesus, let me come walk on the water with you? I don't think I would. Just be honest. That's hard to really imagine, hard to really see that. But still, knowing this situation, right? Knowing what Peter had actually done. He walked on water with Jesus, and then he still doubted later on. He doubted in this situation because he got his eyes on that circumstance. But then later, how do you doubt when you start seeing miracles like that? And you're giving something, and he's giving you the ability to do something that magical and that awesome. It's hard to really fathom, but Peter did have enough faith to step out. He had the faith to step out of that boat to ask. And then when he told him, yeah, come on out, he just stepped out of the boat. That right there takes a mountain of faith, but doubt entered as soon as he seen the storm. He saw the storm, and then he didn't see Jesus no more. When he was getting out of that boat, he was looking at Jesus, and all of a sudden, and then down, right? So that's how we often look at our own lives. We get out there, we may try and take a leap of faith, and then when that storm, whatever that storm looks like, starts raging around us, we take our eyes off of God and our circumstance, and then things start changing. Things start shifting, and we start getting into those moments of doubt. Doubt grows when we focus on our problems instead of God, but faith requires us to keep our eyes on Jesus, and it's a hard thing to do. So if you think about doubt, how do you overcome doubt? Right? How do we get past that? How do we overcome it? It's hard to overcome sometimes. It's hard to get past it and hard to deal with it, but there are ways that we can do it. And one is to bring your doubt to God in an honest way, right? We have to give it to Him. We have to really show God that we want to follow through Him and trust in Him. Psalm 62:8 says, "Trust in Him at all times, ye people, pour out your heart before God. God is our refuge for us." So we should trust in Him at all times, right? Even when those times are uncertain, even those times are rocky, those times are rough, we should still follow after Him. When those waves get rough, right? When those times get hard and those people are coming against us, just like Elijah and Peter, we should be looking to God, following what He wants us to do and following the path that He has for us. We should strengthen our faith through the Word, all right? And that's one really, really big one. We should be strengthening our faith and strengthening our understanding by the Word, by reading, and not just reading, but studying. Studying is a whole different thing than just reading the Bible. When you're studying, you're looking back at all kinds of different things and really diving in. And that's what's going to end up getting us a lot closer and understanding what God has for us and what He can do for us. And then we should meditate really on God's promises. We should really be looking at the promises that God gives us in this book. Right? We should be looking, not just reading it just to say, hey, I read the Bible. Reading it to understand, reading to dive in, reading to study. And I'm not saying like study on a humongous level of trying to bring a 3-hour sermon. I'm just saying to study to understand it, studying on a constant basis, a little bit at a time, and we're going to dive into it more, and then we can stand more on God's promises, because then we'll understand them and we'll know more about them. We can also focus on what God's already done. I mentioned before, sometimes we have those things and we've seen those miracles and seen those things in our lives, and it's easy to forget them sometimes, but we have to focus on those. Pay attention to what's happened in our past before. I consider myself a walking miracle coming from my past and the things that I've been involved with. If I wasn't for God, I'd probably be dead. Or in jail. I just be honest with you. It's not a great, luxurious past and life that I've lived at some time. We can focus on what God's already done in all of our lives. I don't care if you grew up in church. You could have been here since the week you were born. God's still done something for you. He's still done things for you. He still brought you through certain things and certain afflictions, temptations, trials, whatever. We all have that. And if you look at like the story of Elijah, right? We have to focus back and not look at that circumstance and a temporary thing right in front of us, but look at what He just brought us from. Look what He brought us through, and look how He's continuing to move us forward. We all have past victories that we need to remember, and past things that God has done for us and led us through. We can overcome by staying closer to God in prayer. That's our communication, right? We don't have a phone line that we can just pick Him up. We have a direct communication. We have a direct way to talk straight to God. And then He'll talk to us too. We just have to be talking to Him and in connection so that we can understand what He's trying to tell us. But if you're not connected to Him and you're not talking to Him, you're not going to understand or recognize that voice. You're not going to recognize what He's trying to tell you and where He's leading you to go. But the more we're dialed in, the more we're talking to Him and chatting with Him. It's like I think of Drew. If I'm not talking to Drew on a daily basis, or Dee, are they going to think that I care? Probably not. If I just ignore them and I have nothing to do with anything they want to do and I push all my stuff on them, they may not think that I ever care. But the more that I talk to them, more I'm in direct relationship with them. I'm doing things that they like. I'm meeting them where they are. They're going to know, well, Dad cares. Whoever else does, I don't know, but Mom and Dad care because we're involved. We're there. We're doing things daily with them. Same thing with God. The more we're connected in with Him, the more He knows we care. We know He cares. We have that communion with Him, and we can stay stronger to when we get in those moments of doubt. It's not just something that we sulk in and we stay in. We get in that moment of doubt, and then He will churn us through and get us on the other side of it. We can also, I mentioned this earlier, surround ourselves with faith-filled people. That's important. Being here in church is important. Being around faith-filled people, being around people that actually love God and care and want to be here. Right? You think about this Sunday school hour, right? A lot of churches, Sunday school is for youth, not for adults, right? I'm glad we have adult Sunday school. We all need to learn more about God. We all need to dive into the Word. We all need Jesus in our own way, and we need Him in many different ways. So it's good to have that, but we should have that group, whether here at church or your own little private group or whatever it is. We have to have a group and a way to get with faith-filled people. That's what's going to encourage us, because when I'm struggling, somebody else here may not be. But they may have just struggled with something that I'm struggling with now, and they can help me get out of it. They can encourage me to build upon that, right? And the same thing for me. I may have already went through something and I can help someone else. We help each other, and we should build each other up and build each other to where we can be closer to God and get out of those particular funks and those situations. And then last part is we should act in faith even when you feel doubt. What did Elijah do whenever he felt doubt? He just wanted to run away. He took his person over to Beersheba, left them there, and then he went to the wilderness. He said he went a day's journey. That's a long walk for them back then. He just took off, and he was just out in the middle of nowhere and sat underneath the tree and was like, God, just let me die. He didn't look at anything else. He didn't act in faith. He acted in desperation, right? He looked at doubt. He looked at uncertainty. He looked at death that was coming toward him, and instead of being courageous, he kind of got cowardly and kind of got fearful in his own mind and just ran away and said, I don't want nothing to do with this because I can't do it. And he just, after the battle, after the victory, he just got, right? And then he looks at that and he just completely threw that away. So it's important that we look at our particular circumstance, not from what we can see with our physical eyes, not what we see in our circumstance right there in that moment, but look at that moment and then think, okay, well, what's God got in plan for this? What has he already done? Where has he already taken me from? What did he just bring me through? And then we can start learning more about what he's going to take us through. And that's the one great thing I think about this Bible is any situation you get into, there's a story in here about it. There's some passage about it. Somebody's already dealt with that. Jesus dealt with just about everything we're going to deal with on this life, right? He went through all these things. That's what he wanted to do as an example for us. But if you look in here, there's so many stories about things that we dealt with, things that we went through, and things that we're going to go through. I mentioned last time that I talked that I want to start giving more practical applications, more ways we can take it out of here. It's important to learn, important to really dive into the scripture here, but what are we doing with it, right? If we learn it, we read it, we take it, and just we take it now and then we forget about it when we walk out of that door, it doesn't really help us as much. So practically, we can look at this different ways, and here's kind of my weekly challenge for all of us, me included. Number one is identify one area where you're struggling with doubt. Just think of one, right? One area you may be struggling with doubt. Could be work, could be relationship, could be money, could be whatever, right? Could be anything. I don't know. It's all going to be different for each one of us, but identify one area you're struggling with doubt and find 2 to 3 scriptures related to that area, and they're in there. I promise if you really dive in there and you really search and you really diligently look, whatever you're doubting with, it's in here and it's going to be covered. But find 2 to 3 scriptures related to that and then pray with those scriptures and that thought and that concern daily. Take it to God. Take that story, how it relates to you, take those different pieces and take them to God on a daily basis and see what changes. Right? You may have that doubt and you identify that doubt. See how that actually changes and how that makes you grow and how God's going to fix that and where he's going to lead you into it. Because he's going to lead you out of it if you take it to him. When doubt comes in, you should recognize it, replace it with truth, which is where the scriptures come in, refocus on God, and respond in faith. So that's what those 3 pieces will do. Once we recognize that doubt that we have, we replace it with truth and refocus back on God, we can take it to him in prayer and respond in that faith, and then he will lead us out of it. 3 little questions to think about too whenever you're kind of thinking about in your own mind as you go about this week. What Bible example? I mean, you don't have to just take the 3 that I talked about, but you can take those as a starting point if you want, but there's many others. What Bible example do you relate to most in terms of doubt? What scripture piece or what situation do you personally recognize with? And then what causes doubt in your life? All right, what are you actually looking at that may cause doubt or may bring you down as other people or whatever, work situations, whatever it may be? And then what is one step you can take to strengthen your faith? And I think if you take those 3 challenge pieces where you take that scripture and you take all that, that's going to answer it for you. And it's going to answer and God's going to reveal that to you in your mind. Remember that doubt may visit, but it doesn't have to stay, and it shouldn't stay. Doubt may visit, it's going to come in, but we shouldn't be just afraid and just shut down when it does. We should look at it if it comes in, respond with faith, and respond to God, and respond with looking to him to fix things. Faith grows when we choose to trust God in the middle of uncertainty. That's how we grow our faith. You don't grow your faith by just living in a bubble. You can't grow your faith by just living in something that's everything's hunky-dory, rainbows, unicorns, and sunshine all day long. You grow when it's raining. You grow whenever it's storming. You grow when it's not easy, right? And that's when our faith is really going to grow. So in those moments of doubt, uncertainty, concern, find ways that we can take that to God and let our faith grow deeper and grow stronger with Him.